Tonight we are presenting on assessed valuation and local school district taxes. For anyone who's watching, President Miller was kind enough to deliver a mid-fiscal year State of the Union update for our community. One of the big pillars of that was around the growing assessed valuation in our community. It's something that's been a bit unprecedented over the last couple of years specifically. And so we know you may have questions around how that might impact your tax bill and what to look for when you receive your taxes or you look at your bill online. So I want to just provide a little bit of clarity and to answer some questions that might be out there about that. We're so fortunate to have Janelle Stallings with us, who's going to be leading a Q&A. So before we jump into things, we'll kind of just deliver a couple thank yous, give folks a rundown of what we're going to cover tonight, and then we'll hand it over to the team for a bit. So first, I mentioned Janelle's name. We definitely have to say thank you to Janelle. Janelle is the Maple Valley Black Diamond Chamber of Commerce's newest executive director, still getting warmed up and at the busiest time of year, maybe for the person in that position, planning the Hooked on Fishing Derby. April 21st and 22nd, shameless plug here, Janelle, April 21st and 22nd, the 20th annual Hooked on Fishing Derby presented by the Chamber and also in partnership with Maple Valley Rotary and the City of Maple Valley. So Janelle, we really appreciate you giving us some of your time, and thank you to the Chamber for letting us steal you away for part of a night during what we know is the busiest time of the year for you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. And thank you for that shout out. It is a lot, and we're really excited. It's a great event and super fun.
The other group we want to thank before we get going is our ad hoc budget committee. So for anyone who's watching and wasn't tuned into what that group did, we brought together a group of about 30 stakeholders that began meeting this winter. And their role was really to come up with questions and considerations that our school board and our district could utilize moving forward here into upcoming budget cycles. And one of the common themes that especially came out of the later meetings with that group was around budget related communication and having learning and engagement opportunities for our community to dive in a little bit deeper like we're going to do tonight. So tonight's webinar was one of the ideas that was definitely sparked from those conversations, and we're super grateful to that committee, not only for helping us think of events like this one, but for all the work they did supporting our school board as we head into our budget adoption season already for next year. A little bit of housekeeping before we jump into things. So if you're either watching at home or you're watching the recording at a later time, we're going to go around the room and just introduce everybody, and then I'll give you a little bit of a rundown of what tonight is going to look like. I'm going to go around my screen, and I'm actually going to start with Janelle again. And Janelle, could you tell us a little bit about you and maybe a little bit about your new role too, and why you decided to dive into that role at the Chamber?
Yeah, absolutely. Janelle Stallings, newly appointed, green as grass, executive director here at the Chamber. I've had the fortune to work at the Chamber for about 9 months now, and just really love the members, love the businesses. It's been a lot of fun to bring value to the members and to be a part of this community for almost 21 years now. So I really want to give my all and do my best for this community and for the businesses, and to support them and grow with them and see what we can do to give them the most value in the Chamber.
Thanks so much, Janelle. We really appreciate the partnership that the Chamber has with our district too. Going around, go Bill, Pete, Mike, Lori, in that order.
Hey everyone, Bill Hernandez, Chief Accountant for the district.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Pete Miller. I'm one of the school board members for Tahoma, currently serving as the president for this year. I've been in the community for about 20 years. Have a couple of kids that are in the Tahoma school system, and thank you for being here, and thanks for putting us on.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Mike Hanson. I'm the superintendent for the school district and a proud Tahoma graduate and father to 4 Tahoma graduates.
Good evening. My name is Lori Cloud. I'm the Assistant Superintendent, Director of Finance and Operations for the Tahoma School District, a proud parent of 3 Tahoma graduates, and a member of this community for over 34 years.
Thanks, team. So there's going to be kind of 2 portions to tonight's event. The first one is, you can see I'm sharing some slides here. We're going to have more of a presentation style from some of the folks that are on the screen. It'll take us to about the bottom of the hour to about 6:30. And then when we come back, we'll from there, we'll do a Q&A portion that Janelle is going to lead. She's got some questions that she's going to share with the team, and we'll just do some Q&A there. We have the Q&A portal of the Zoom webinar open for those who are watching live. We've got kind of a tight schedule, so we may not be able to answer those, but if you do have related questions, feel free to drop them in the Q&A. We're going to make sure that we log all of those, and we'll get back to you with answers. If we do have some time at the very end, and Janelle's made her way through her questions, we may be able to get to a couple of those. But if you put a question there tonight, we'll definitely get it answered for you. And then we are recording tonight's meeting, so you may be watching this at a later time too, or if you're watching live and have to jump off early tonight, it'll be posted on our district website and then also to our Budget 101 website as well too. Without further ado, President Miller, do you want to lead us off with a little Assess Valuation 101?
I'd love to. Thank you, AJ. So assessed valuation is something you've probably been hearing a lot about. The school district has certainly been paying attention to this. It's something that's has a significant impact on us, and not only as a school system, but certainly as residents, homeowners, and so forth in the district as well. So I wanted to talk through that a little bit and help this kind of tee up a deeper conversation we're going to have about the impact that it's having. But assessed valuation is essentially just a phrase that's used and a synonym with home value or property value. And this is, something that it's a little bit different than what you find when you are out on Redfin or other websites looking to figure out what the fair value of your property is if you wanted to sell it. This is something that the county does to assess basically the tax base that your property taxes are going to be based on. They assign a value to the land that a property sits on. They also assign a value to improvements on that property, which is a house or a dwelling of some sort. And so there's a couple of different things you'll see on your tax bill relative to that. But I just want to point out and be clear that the valuation used to come up with your property taxes is different than the home appraisal that you might see from other sources. It certainly has a direct impact on your tax bill. And we'll flip to the next. And so, just at a very broad level, what does assessed valuation look like in the Tahoma School District? And I'll tell you what you're looking at here. There's a lot of information. You see a shaded area that's in yellow or gold, and then you see a line graph that is in blue. And what I'll point out, the shaded area is aligned with the y-axis on the left of your screen. The blue line is aligned with the right axis, the y-axis on the right of your screen. And the shaded area, what that's telling us is what the assessed valuation of the school district boundary, all the properties within the school district boundary, what's the grand total of assessed valuation over time. And so you're looking at billions of dollars in that shaded area. And you can see we go back, roughly 10 years here. And we were coming out of the recession in that period, and then starting to climb again. And the entire valuation of the district, the properties inside of the district, residences and commercial businesses and everything, has nearly tripled over that period of time. Some of that has to do with fair value differences between what your home was worth in 2012, 2013, and what it's worth now. Some of that also has to do with additional building that's taken place inside of our district boundaries, both from a commercial standpoint and a residential standpoint. There's new homes, there's new businesses. All of that is contributing to improvements of properties within our district, and increasing, at least a portion of the increases is in our valuation is related to that. The blue line is the annual change in valuation. And so you can see that that goes up and down a little bit, but generally, with the exception of 2012 and 2013, it's continued to go up each year, sometimes in big amounts, sometimes in more modest amounts. But something I'll point out in 3 of these years saw significant growth, 2015, and then the last 2 years, 2022 and 2023. The assessed valuation that was assigned was significantly higher than other years, and I'd say, higher than what we've come to expect as normal as well. So we've seen a significant bump here in what our assessed valuation looks like for property tax purposes, and that has an impact certainly on our district. And so with that lead in, I'll hand it over to Bill Hernandez to take us a couple layers deeper.
Perfect. Thanks, Pete. So what you're seeing on this screen is a breakdown of a tax bill for property within our district boundary, assessed at $717,000. That's the sum of the land value and the improvement value. Anyone can go in online, find their property tax, and see their tax bill broken down in a similar way. I believe AJ just sent a link in the chat to the King County website that you can pull up and take a look at your own property tax bill. If you look at the bottom left-hand corner, you'll see that this household is paying $7,296.14 in property taxes this year. On the right-hand side, you'll see 3 lines with the word school included. The top 2 lines are taxes that go directly to the state for education. Our community and our district don't have any control over that number. The third line, that local school line, is what our district property owners pay, and that goes directly to education of students in our community. So the question that you probably have is, so what makes up that local school chunk of the pie? If we can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. It's broken up into 3 categories. And you've probably all heard of these before. The first is our EPNO, that stands for Educational Programs and Operations Levy. The second is our tech levy, and the third is the bond. All 3 of these items were voter approved, and we'll go touch into what makes up each of these. So first of all, starting with the EPNO levy, this pays for things such as staffing, programs, extracurriculars, transportation, classroom materials and supplies, utilities, all of these things that our community has said is important to operating a quality school district, but that the state funding model doesn't consider part of basic education. Jumping over to the middle column, the tech levy, technology levy pays for laptops and other classroom technology, software licenses, tech support, staff, servers, Wi-Fi, all the other things that fall under the technology bucket. And lastly, we have the bond, which voters approved back in 2013. This bond led to the construction of the new Tahoma High School, the rebuild of Lake Wilderness Elementary, as well as numerous warm, safe, dry improvements at every campus, which includes things like security enhancements, HVAC replacements, new water heaters, new roofs, carpeting, so on and so forth. One little phrase you might hear to remember this is that levies are for learning and bonds are for building. So let's zoom in specifically on the EPNO levy, the light blue box on this chart here. When school districts run a levy, the voters approve a dollar amount, and that's the number under EPNO total collected. So in 21, it was 15.7 million. In 22, it was 16.7, so on and so forth. When the district communicates about levies, they typically break it down as a rate per $1,000 of AV, of assessed valuation. This number is meant to help a property tax owner more easily understand what a $20.4 million collection will actually mean for them as a taxpayer. The voters are not actually voting on a rate, they're voting on a total amount. Again, so voters aren't voting on the rate, total amount. That's key there. When the voters approved the EPNO levy back in 2020, it was estimated that the levy would cost about $2 per every $1,000 of AV each year through 2024. With the big jump in AV growth since the levy was approved, that estimated rate has actually come in lower than anticipated. But again, voters approved the total dollar amount in that total collected column on the right. Because the levy is actually the dollar amount and not the rate per thousand, your taxes are not going to just go up because your AV went up. But at the same time, your taxes aren't also going to go down. So if your home was assessed at $540K 2 years ago, it's now worth $717K, your local school tax rate will drop, but the amount you're paying in local tax will be roughly the same. Here is the formula, I think AJ just showed it, to show you how your total local school tax is calculated. If you look back at the prior slide, this person actually paid $3 less in local school taxes than the calculator shows. And this is just goes back to tax rates have 5 or 6 decimal points behind them, and we just rounded this to the nearest penny, so only 2 decimal points. So $3 are rounding differences. Now, you're probably wondering, how does that $3.28 rate stack up against our neighboring school districts? If you go to the next slide. Thank you. If you look at this, the side on your left screen, you can see that our local school tax rate sits in the upper half of King County school districts. But if you look at the right-hand side, the chart on the right, you'll see that Tahoma is second to last in tax collected per student FTE. Really quick, FTE stands for full-time equivalent on a super simplified level. Think of this as the amount of time that a student is on campus. So if you have a high school student in Running Start and that student is at Tahoma High School 25% of the time, the state would count that student as a 0.25 FTE, full-time equivalent. That's different from headcount, which is a number of unique students enrolled in our district. And that's only relevant because the state funds us based on our enrollment. They are using FTE, not our headcount. So just a reminder that FTE is always a little bit less than headcount. Before we move to the next slide, let's take a quick look at a district like Mercer Island, for example. So if you look at the left-hand side, they are number 19th out of 20 school districts in King County in tax rate at a total of $1.38. But they're in their 8th in taxes collected per student FTE. So how is it that taxpayers in our district pay a local tax rate 2.5 times higher, but Mercer Island collects about $2,800 more per student from their local taxes? Next slide, please. And the story is really here on this slide. When we talk about the pie that I think Pete alluded to earlier, that makes up our district-wide assessed valuation. It's roughly $12 billion. That calculates out to about $1.4 million per student FTE. Again, let's use Mercer Island as an example. They have less than half our student population, but their total AV is nearly double that of our community. And their AV per student FTE is about 4 times as high as ours. This gives Mercer Island the opportunity to have a tax rate of only $1.38 per $1,000 of AV, but to collect significantly more per student. And this happens in a couple of ways. One is that King County just assesses their properties at a higher value. The bigger reason is commercial properties. Our district has a lower commercial tax base than most of our neighbors, and in this case, Mercer Island. Another example is, think of a place like Seattle, who is 18th in tax rate from the prior slide, but second in AV per pupil on this slide. They have tons of commercial properties and a few that are worth a lot of money. So their commercial tax base is huge. So they run one of the lowest local school tax rates in the county, but they collect nearly 3 times per student as Tahoma. In our district, it's really the homeowners who are stepping up for our students because the commercial tax base doesn't take on nearly as much of that burden and responsibility. Then I'm going to pass it to Superintendent Hanson, who's going to talk about why $2 per 1,000.
Cool. Thanks, Bill. Appreciate that. So you're looking at what our team refers to as my favorite graph, because it really tells the story of where we've been, but also where we're headed. And Bill's question was, why are we collecting currently, or why did we pass an EP&O rate of $2 per thousand back in 2020? And the story actually starts back in 2013. You heard Bill reference a conversation about bonds there. And 2013 is when we passed the bond that allowed us to build the high school in the center of the city, as well as rebuild Lake Wilderness and complete a number of projects that touched every single building in the system. That bond, when we passed it, we knew opening up the new high school and reconfiguring, we were going to lose the economy of scale that we had with a number of our elementaries and other buildings, and that it would be a little more expensive to run our schools. So the decision was made to begin making sure that we had a comfortable fund balance that was prepared to open the schools and operate them with the kind of programming that we've come to expect here in our community. Again, as we move forward, we got to 2017 when the new buildings open. And that was around the same time that the state came to a conclusion on the McCleary, or it came to the McCleary decision. The state had been sued with claims that it wasn't meeting its obligation for fully funding basic education. And there was a lot of questions up in the air about what the state's solution for this was going to be, the McCleary decision. And so budgets were really tough to figure out at that time. And there was a pretty substantial switch in levy collection by the state at that point on real estate taxes. Fast forward up to around 2020. And the general fund balance, or the rainy day fund, or the district's bank account, whatever you want to refer to it as, is right in the middle of the screen there. And it was in 2019 that our board was faced with the decision of an EP&O levy and what's an appropriate rate. And the state at the time, the maximum rate that you were allowed to go out for as a community was $250 per thousand. And looking at the fund balance and knowing that we had an opportunity to use some of that money to help support programs moving forward, our school board made the decision to go out at a lower rate of $2 per thousand at the time, which you heard Bill reference earlier, and begin a slow drawdown of that rainy day fund. So you can see how that's panned out since 2019, 2020. And here we are looking at the end of 22-23 and closing in on about 13%. So for us, looking ahead, we know that the drawdown rate that we have is certainly not sustainable. And a target fund balance is a 10 to 12%, what we're looking for. So we're at a position where we have a decision to make moving forward with our community in terms of what is it going to look like to be able to provide the kinds of services that we've come to expect for our kids. Can you slip to the next one there, AJ? This is another significant table. Kind of goes back to what we're talking about when Bill was sharing. So on the left-hand side, you can see these are all 20 school districts in King County. And up at the top, the title on this is General Fund. GF is General Fund Revenue per Pupil, which is in FTE for all of King County's districts. So this includes all federal funding, all state funding, and all local funding, all of those together. And you can see that the funding per pupil that we have in Tahoma is the lowest in King County during 21-22. And then over on the right-hand side, similar idea, except for instead of revenues, it's expenditures in 21-22. And you can see it's slightly higher, our expenditure per pupil, than our funding is. So that shows you that we're, drawing down that fund balance, where that comes from. And I think there's a lot to be stated in these tables. And it's kind of a point of pride for us in our school system that that shows we're able to do more with less here. It's a piece where our community has come to expect a certain level of product, and we're very proud of what we're able to put out for a student experience here. So can you slip to the next one, AJ? So another significant graph here. So what you're looking at is, Maple Valley and our community, the Tahoma community, is a draw for families. People come here for a lot of reasons. Certainly one of them is the schools. We know that with the Growth Management Act in our state, we're expecting additional students in the coming years. Hundreds of students will be coming here. We've engaged with Educational Data Solutions, who's a demographer, to work with the city of Maple Valley and give us best estimates moving forward of how our enrollment is going to be impacted over the next 10 years or so. As you can see, the high, medium, and low estimates are all going up. So we're anticipating kids moving here and our community continuing to grow. And we have a commitment to continue to provide an incredible experience for our kids. And that's a big part of what Tahoma 100 is all about. It's looking at pride, or with pride, at what we've done up to this point, but also looking ahead to what the beginning of the next century is going to look like for Tahoma. So, AJ, I'll kick it back over to you at that point, sir.
Thank you, everybody. If you jumped on late, a reminder that we have the Q&A portal in the webinar open for people who are viewing live. If you have questions that you want answered around AV or what we get into in our Q&A, feel free to drop them there. Depending on what kind of time we have left after Janelle leads us through a Q&A, we may be able to get to a couple of those questions. Otherwise, we'll definitely get back to you with answers to your questions at a later time too. So that is going to move us now into the second half of our evening. And so we're going to hand it over to Janelle. And Janelle, we know you've got some questions, so feel free to put those out to the group, and we'll just see where this will take us to. As we get closer to 7, I'll give us a little heads up that we're running short on time, so we can ask any final questions there.
Sounds great. Well, I think something that is really forthcoming and really something that's on a lot of everyone's mind is, what should a taxpayer expect as Maple Valley's population and Tahoma's enrollment continues to grow?
I can find my unmute button, I'm happy to jump in there. I think one of the pieces a taxpayer can expect is, as our community grows, the number of people that are able to contribute to the tax base helps with our tax rate going down. And you heard Bill do a really nice job of explaining some of the surrounding communities, and not just the commercial base, but certainly the commercial base growing as well. With some of the zoning that we're seeing in the city of Maple Valley, we're anticipating an increase in our commercial base as well. So that makes me optimistic. So Bill or Lori or Pete.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say that with the Growth Management Act, and Mike, you talked about this, there's the idea there that we're going to be, the state has asked the county has asked the city to take on additional residences. That creates some density within our district, and to the extent that there's that going on, that means that there's more taxpayers to share the load of the total property tax bill that comes from either the city of Maple Valley or the Tahoma School District or what have you. So that growth comes with a little more sharing, I suppose. Which I also think is positive. And I agree with you. I'm optimistic about the additional commercial businesses that are coming our way too.
Anyone else want to speak to that? Cool. Well, Pete, you brought up something that I think is also, a really good question that leads into the city has a growth management requirement to have a plan in place that would accommodate up to 1,700 new units over the next 2 decades. And how does the district account for that new construction and an increased tax base when planning for those levies and bonds?
Yeah, I'll start since I kind of led us that way. It's a tricky calculation and formula that we go through there to consider all of that. You heard us talk a little bit earlier about a demographer, which is a professional that understands population, movement and behavior and all the various reasons for why that happens. We engage with a demographer to really help us understand what our population is going to look like over time. The nature of levies and bonds is that they are for medium periods of time, 2 to 4 years for a levy. And so we're, even though that doesn't seem like all that long of a period, there's a lot of things that can go on relative to a population over that period of time. So we really need the expertise of that professional to help us understand what population growth is going to look like. And that includes new construction. It includes what I'll call churn, or households turning over, where specific to the school district, perhaps you've got a home that doesn't have any school-age children in it, and that family moves or sells, and a family with school-age children moves in. That creates some additional student population for us, where it doesn't create a new home, but it does create new students for us. So that we consider that as well, the turnover of existing homes and construction of new homes. And then on top of that, we try as best we can to estimate what that assessed valuation is going to do over that period of time. And all of those factors blend into what the budgeting process that we go through to understand the revenues and expenditures, where gaps might reside, and how we can use levies to close in those gaps based on what our community is asking for and what we value.
I think a couple pieces I would add on to Pete, Janelle. One of the factors, many factors, but one of the factors that the demographer looks at is the student generation factor, they call it, which is the number of kids per home or students per home. And I think it's pretty telling that we have the highest student generation factor by a long shot in all of King County. That's a piece that reinforces that people are coming here for schools and coming here with their school age kids. So that's a big one, and that's one to monitor as well. And I think really answering your question is you do the best you can with the information that you have available to you at the time, and you monitor things very closely, like what's happening down in Olympia. We're coming to the end of their cycle right now for the next biennial budget. And those are things that definitely can have an impact, or do have an impact on school systems. So it's, as Pete alluded to, there's quite a few different factors to track. But when you break them down one at a time, you end up with a product, and you work with the community in terms of what the community expectations are, both on what it's able to absorb tax-wise and what it comes to expect for the kids in our area.
Awesome. Well, this kind of leads into something that was in the presentation in the slides, and we saw that Tahoma is collecting fewer local taxes per student than 18 of 19 of the King County districts this year. And how do school districts determine what is needed, and how does Tahoma maintain such a low collection?
Yeah, I think I can start that one, and then I'd love for Lori to jump in here from an operations standpoint as well. As far as quality of experience for our students, we have just an absolutely top-notch teaching and learning department and administrative team that really has an eye for getting bang for your buck. What are the most valuable experiences we can put through our kids through for what we have available resource-wise. I think it's a benefit that the money is closest to the kids in our school system. And what I mean when I say that is we're well staffed in our buildings. We have lots of support in our buildings, and the money is put towards the kids and the kid experience as opposed to other areas. I think another super important part is the care of our facilities. We have, hundreds of millions of dollars worth of facilities that, if left untended, become a burden. So I guess I'll turn that one over to Lori.
That's very true. And, as we add additional facilities into our district, something else we're always continuing to look at and ensuring that we maintain those buildings and those facilities. We have a really high functioning, super talented group of operations staff. They work really hard to ensure the buildings are ready for students and take a lot of pride in our buildings. And we hear consistently when people visit from other districts that we do a really good job of maintaining our buildings and our facilities. So we take a lot of pride in that, but we do it with a lot of care and thought as far as being a lot of bang for our buck, as Mike said earlier. Another thing that I'd want to point out is, we do get some economies of scale from the size of our facilities as well. So larger schools help to control some of those costs that you're not having to spread out over a larger number of buildings. So, but operations is key to that, and ensuring that we're keeping our sustainability in mind and consistently looking at ways to save money.
One thing I'll add on to what Mike had said too, we showed the glide path earlier and you see the differences that we have in revenues and expenditures. And I shouted out the ad hoc budget committee at the start. And when that group got together, we almost took them line by line on our balance sheet to show them this is where the money's going, this is where the money comes from. And you can quickly see that, there's not a lot of opportunities to really increase revenues that you might think. There's little things you can do, like applying for grants and raising prices on things like that, but there's not a ton of opportunities to completely shift the amount of revenue that we bring in. And so then when you start asking the questions of, okay, how are we gonna close that gap? And then you ask the question of, well, what would you cut? And there's really not much. That group sat there and said, well, you can't get rid of that and that and that, because either we really feel like we need it for our kids or because the state requires it, which is a huge part of it too. So there's not as much flexibility, I think, as maybe a lot of people think, in the way that you can either pull this lever to increase revenue or pull this to decrease expenditures without really impacting the type of product that we're giving our kids too.
All right. And what are the challenges of predicting assessed evaluation changes, and how does that influence levy planning?
I'll take that one. We've seen, as Mike and Bill pointed out too earlier, a lot of fluctuation in our assessed valuation over particularly the last 10 years. We saw it increasing pretty steadily, and then we all remember when we saw the so-called crash, and then consistently building since then. But it's difficult to predict. It really is, and no one could predict some of the last 2 years of increases that we've seen. But we do have different factors that we look at for sure. We utilize our bond council, which has a lot of insight into what's happening in the economy throughout, not only throughout the state, but throughout the nation. So we utilize that information. We utilize our contacts at King County, who are constantly assessing property on a regular basis. So we utilize them. We also look at the growth that's happening within our district. The demographers report helps to reflect that. So our demographer is also another point of information that we use. And we use all this information to bring it together to synthesize what we believe is, as close to reality as we can expect.
Lori, you said bond counsel. Could you share a little bit more about what that group does?
Sure. So historically, when we passed the previous bond measure, there's a lot of requirements, annual requirements, that requires to keep in contact with that bond counsel. And as we have that constant contact, that counsel are actually the people that the company or the organization that actually goes out and markets bonds and is constantly analyzing markets throughout the United States and what to expect in the economy as they're trying to predict what bonds and bond sales look like in the current and into the future. So our counsel is someone we rely on to get the most current information that they have available to us.
All right. The estimated levy rate anticipates AV growth each year. What happens to the levy rate if AV doesn't increase the way that assessors anticipate?
Lori or Pete, you want to jump in there?
Yeah, I'll start, and Laura, you can backfill for me. But we've seen that go both ways actually, and there's been times when AV growth wasn't as high as we thought it would be when we were doing our estimates and so forth. And in a situation like that, there's, as we talked about earlier, the idea of helping homeowners understand the impact that these levies have on their property taxes. We talk about it in a dollar value per thousand. And this last levy, we talked about $2 per thousand. And the board made an election at the time, one of the years here recently that AV growth wasn't as big as we thought it would be. And we actually would have been authorized to collect more than $2 per thousand. And we made the choice at the time that we wanted to keep it where it was, what we had communicated and kind of promised to the community as far as what that rate would look like at a maximum, and keep it right there. So that the terminology is called a levy rollback, which is what we did. We told the state that we're not going to collect as much as we're authorized to. So that's how that works. And then what we've seen and what Bill talked about is it can go the other way too, where AV is much higher than we anticipated it being. And like we talked about, the district is went to the voters with a proposal for a total dollar amount of collection, and collectively the community decided to pass that 4 years ago and authorized us to collect that total amount. So when the valuation goes up and up, again, those dollars per thousand, there's more thousands when the valuation goes up. So that means your rate goes down, even though the total dollar amount collected is the same. So the rate per thousand for any homeowner goes down as assessed valuation goes up. And that's what Bill was showing earlier. Lori, what would you add?
That was a very nice explanation, Pete. The only thing that I think that I would add is when we're looking at that dollar amount, as Pete commented on, and trying to balance that with what the needs of the district are, it's constant conversations at the board level on what that right amount is to meet the needs of the district and to the programs that our community believes has told us what is important, but also understanding what are the limitations of our assessed valuation in our community.
Right.
Lori, one of the pieces of that too that I think is interesting too is not only are property values going up, but the cost of everything is going up too. And so your team is trying to project what fuel and food and things are going to cost 4 years down the line. That just creates all kinds of challenges on top of that too.
Yeah, it's not just in 4 years down the line, right? We're seeing it year by year with cost of, like you said, fuel, our insurance rates. Those are unprecedented increases we've seen the last couple of years that no one can predict what that might look like in 2 to 3 years. All those things need to be taken into account.
All right. So based on the property tax bill that was shown in the presentation, about 23% went to state school funding. And the state has a requirement to fund basic education. Why does the district need to supplement with local levies?
I think that's a great question. I think Lori kind of started to allude to it in the previous answer. I think fundamentally, defining basic education and what people have come to expect in our community is different than how the state is defining it. If you were to dig into the details a little bit and look at what's funded by the state and what's not funded and what's required, and there is no money for from the state, or there's not enough money for, it's a pretty substantial list. And so as a community, we've come to expect certain things for our kids, a minimum expectation of what basic education is. And without the levies, those things, many of those things wouldn't be possible. So it's a gap there. And again, I think the state, faced a lawsuit in the teens, and that's the McCleary decision that we referred to. And the state now is facing another lawsuit similarly regarding school construction funds and whether or not that's defined as basic education. So there's these things that are important for us to watch and monitor that impact our bottom line moving forward. Lori, do you want to add anything there?
The only thing that I would add to that is kind of highlighting what AJ talked about earlier with the budget committee, ABC committee that we had earlier, and we kind of ran through the pretty specific detail, line by line on that budget of expenditures of what is the levy actually pays for. And there were a lot of questions around, wow, didn't realize, or realizations, wow, I didn't realize the state did not fund all of the costs of special education or all of the costs of learning assistance program, all of any of the enrichment activities, the list goes forever. And so all of those things, that to AJ's point, is those things are all important, and and all need to be funded in a manner that currently isn't funded by the state.
One thing
Background checks was the one that stood out to that group that I remember.
What's that?
Background checks was the one that stood out to
Fingerprint.
Yeah. One thing I'd add just really quickly is that this definitional difference between what the state believes basic education is and what communities believe a baseline expectation of education should look like for their kids is not unique to Tahoma. There's 295 school districts in the state of Washington, and nearly all of them have a levy that they run to supplement what their communities and what our community believes to be basic education and what we have come to expect and want for our kids and their education. And so, we've got, there's a lot of communities that are supplementing with levies to help fund the things that their communities have come to expect and value.
All right, excellent. Okay, what can homeowners and local business owners do to partner with the school district, and where should they go to learn more information?
Can definitely email, call any of us. We'd love to hear from people. I think organizations like the Chamber, like Rotary, places where business owners are coming together to collaborate, are amazing opportunities to invite us into, to have conversations, share information. Thinking about homeowners, obviously individual conversations can happen, but if people are in an HOA and want to invite us to one of their meetings or something like that, we're always happy to show up and just have conversations with people. We just burned through a dozen slides pretty quickly, and there's a lot of complex information, and could have made this a multi-hour long presentation. It's tough if this is not the something that you are always paying attention to in the way that some of the folks on the screen have to be able to just get it. And so we'd love to come and try and really help people simplify it, put it in a conversational way that they can ask questions and we can try and answer and clarify things. So people who are part of organizations, please feel free to reach out to us and invite us to things. We love going to places and talking to people.
All right, excellent. Well, this was mentioned earlier, and the district has levies expiring in 2024. What is the plan?
I can start this one, and then pretty much anybody I think on the screen can jump in. With the levies expiring in 2024, and then also thinking back to that bell-shaped curve graph that was shown earlier, we're in the process of looking very closely at what our needs are moving forward in terms of student experience and the resources it'll take to create that. I know AJ and several people have mentioned the ad hoc budget committee multiple times, playing a role in helping to support the school board and our budgeting staff with additional thinking and different questions. So that's definitely been helpful. Moving forward, what I anticipate is we'll continue through our budgeting process for this year, which also requires us to be looking out 4 years in advance. There's some things that we need additional information around right now. Certainly, our enrollment projections are very important, but also what's some finality of what's happening down in Olympia and get the next biennial budget out of there. Those are two really significant components for us to understand what the fiscal situation will look like over the next couple of years. And those are things that influence the decision, the board's decision with the community around what do we want our schools to look like and what do we want our student experience to be. We're always working closely with our teaching and learning department and special services in terms of that student experience component. We had a cafe with community members, and one of the pieces that came out of that was a pretty loud and clear call in terms of some expectations from our community, and those are things that we're processing through right now, and to see how those are going to play out within the school system for kids over the next couple of years. And some of those things require resources, some of them don't. But that's at least a little bit of a start for thinking about what's happening moving forward. Specifically, Janelle, what I anticipate is sometime later this spring through the summer, we'll have enough information to be moving the rock forward a little bit on what a levy need might look like. Our school board will engage in conversations around that with the budgeting staff. And I would anticipate next fall, our school board probably taking some action on a levy. But at that point, I would stop talking and turn it over to Pete.
It's a really well said, Mike, and just a great overview of the process and the steps involved and the complexity. I would agree with that timeline. I think that we know that there's a lot of work going on right now around our annual budget, and that work will continue in due course as it does, and that work will certainly involve looking at what needs we have as a system based on what we're hearing from the community and programming and student experiences and so forth. And so the timing for that would be to make a decision about a proposal for the community in the early fall, so that we have some time to answer questions and engage on that topic for a few months. So that's another step in the process, and we feel as though we've gotten a lot of terrific input from the community on what expectations are, what we would like to see programmatically, and we're thankful for that. We're really thankful for that partnership and that engagement, and looking forward to having those discussions with the rest of the board to see all of that begin to coalesce and turn into a plan. So those are the steps I see playing out, and thankful for everything that got us to where we are right now, and looking forward to the next steps ahead.
Excellent.
AJ, you want to add anything, Lori or Bill?
You guys covered it pretty well.
All right, well, that kind of concludes my questions. So AJ, I'm going to pass it back to you.
All right, great timing. That is just about it for tonight. Because I have to, I'm going to drop a link for anyone for the Hooked on Fishing Derby. It's in the chat. So another thank you to Janelle and the Chamber during a really busy time. And Janelle, we are really, really appreciative of the partnership that the Chamber has with the district and all that you do to keep our two groups connected. It means a lot. So thank you for being here and making sure that we're hearing from community voice and for all that you're doing. Good luck with the Derby and congrats on your new gig.
Thanks. Thanks so much.
Thank you to everyone else and anyone watching at home. Again, if you're watching the recording of this later on, feel free to send us an email. My email is just ajgarcia@tahomasd.us. TSD, Tahoma School District, TSD messages @tahomasd.us is another great way to get a hold of us quickly, and then we can just make sure that we connect you with the best person. So if you have questions on this or anything else, please feel free to reach out to us at any time. We'd love to hear from you. We know that this is a lot happening in our system, in our community right now, through a lot of numbers at you. So if you have clarifying questions, please don't hesitate to ask. We'd love to hear from you.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful evening.